My name is Anna, and that morning was anything but peaceful. As the first wave of pain hit me, a sharp, stark reminder that our baby was on its way, I called out to my husband, Mark. "Mark, it's time," I gasped, clutching my swollen belly. He stumbled into the room, his eyes wide with a mixture of excitement and fear. Okay, let's go," he muttered, helping me to my feet. But before we could take another step, his phone rang. It was his mother, Evelyn. Despite my increasingly intense contractions, Mark answered the phone. "Mom? Now?" He hesitated, glancing at me with an apologetic look. I couldn't believe it. My husband, the man who had promised to be by my side through thick and thin, was considering abandoning me at this crucial moment. "Mark, please," I pleaded. "We need to go to the hospital." He nodded distractedly, murmuring a response to his mother. "Yes, Mom, I know, but Anna is in labor." The conversation seemed endless. With each passing second, my discomfort grew, both physically and emotionally. I felt a betrayal building, a stark realization that I was not his priority. Finally, Mark ended the call, his expression torn. "Anna, I have to drop Mom first. She has her weekly art class." I stared at him, incredulous. "Are you serious? Your child is about to be born." "I'm sorry, Anna," he mumbled, pulling out his wallet. "Here, take this." He handed me a $20 bill as if it could somehow compensate for his absence. Before I could protest, he was gone, the sound of the car engine fading into the distance. Left alone, pain surging through me, I felt a wave of despair. Our marriage, once a canvas of love and mutual respect, now seemed like a forgotten sketch, overshadowed by Evelyn's overbearing presence. I had met Mark in college, a charming senior who won my heart with his kind words and gentle demeanor. Our relationship blossomed, and soon after graduation, we married. Those days now seemed like a distant memory, a stark contrast to the cold reality of my current predicament. Evelyn, Mark's mother, had always been a challenging figure in our lives. Initially, I tried to see past her harsh words, believing it to be typical mother-in-law behavior. But over time, her true nature became apparent. She was manipulative, always finding ways to wedge herself between Mark and me. I remember our first meeting. Her eyes had scanned me critically, her lips curling in distaste. "What's with your hair, dear? Trying a bit too hard, aren't we?" I had felt so small, so judged. Mark had tried to brush it off, claiming she was just nervous. But deep down, I knew it was more than that. Her words were always laced with venom, her actions a clear indication of her desire to control every aspect of Mark's life. And now, as I stood alone in our living room, struggling with labor pains, I realized the extent of her hold over him. It was a revelation that stung sharply, a realization that I was secondary in my husband's life. As the pain intensified, a sense of urgency overcame me. I needed to get to the hospital, with or without Mark. I dialed a taxi, my hands trembling, tears streaming down my face. I was about to bring our child into the world, and I was doing it alone. The taxi arrived quickly, and as I stepped out of the house, I took one last look back. It was a bittersweet farewell to the life I thought I had, a life overshadowed by a woman who saw me as nothing more than an obstacle to her son's undivided attention. In the back seat of the taxi, as we sped towards the hospital, I made a silent vow. I would be strong, not just for my baby, but for myself. I would no longer be a victim of Evelyn's manipulations or Mark's inability to stand up to her. This was the beginning of a new chapter, one where I would reclaim my life and my dignity. As the hospital came into view, a sense of resolve settled over me. This was not the end, but a new beginning. A beginning where I would stand tall, a mother ready to face the world with her child. Life, I had learned, was full of surprises, some more bitter than others. As I lay in the hospital bed, awaiting the birth of my child, my mind wandered back to the early days with Mark and his mother, Evelyn. I had always known that Evelyn held a special place in Mark's life. She was, after all, a single mother who had raised him alone. But what I hadn't anticipated was the depth of her influence over him, a hold so strong it often left me feeling like an outsider in my own marriage. Our first meeting had been a disaster. I had spent hours preparing, eager to make a good impression, but from the moment Evelyn laid eyes on me, I knew I was fighting a losing battle. "What kind of girl dyes her hair such an outrageous color?" she had sneered, her eyes scanning my carefully styled hair. I had felt my cheeks burn with embarrassment, a sinking feeling in my stomach. Mark had hastily dyed my hair a more conservative shade the night before, hoping to please his mother. But it seemed nothing I did was good enough for Evelyn. Mark had always excused his mother's behavior. "She's just set in her ways," he would say, or "she means well, deep down." But as time went on, her thinly veiled insults and constant interference in our lives became harder to ignore. I remembered one particular evening, a dinner that had started off pleasantly enough. We were celebrating Mark's promotion at work, a momentous occasion. But Evelyn's presence had cast a shadow over our celebration. "You must be so proud of Mark," I had said, trying to make conversation. "Proud? Of what?" Evelyn had replied, her voice dripping with disdain. "A promotion in a job he only got because of his father's connections. I suppose it's an achievement for someone with such limited ambitions." I had watched, stunned, as Mark said nothing, his eyes fixed on his plate. It was moments like these that chipped away at my respect for him, his inability to stand up to his mother slowly eroding the love I had once felt. As my pregnancy progressed, Evelyn's hold on Mark seemed to tighten. She would call him at all hours, demanding his attention for the most trivial matters. And Mark, ever the dutiful son, would always comply. "You don't understand, Anna," he would say whenever I protested. "She's all alone. She needs me." "But what about me? What about our baby?" These were questions I stopped asking, knowing I would never get the answers I sought. And now, as I prepared to bring our child into the world, I realized how much I had lost. My marriage had become a shadow of what it once was, consumed by the overbearing presence of a woman who saw me as nothing more than a threat to her control over her son. As the nurses bustled around me, preparing for the delivery, I felt a sense of loneliness wash over me. I was about to become a mother, a role I had always dreamed of, but in that moment I felt more alone than ever. And yet, amidst the fear and uncertainty, there was a flicker of hope. This child, my child, would be my salvation. A new beginning, a chance to break free from the chains of a toxic bond and start anew. As the first cries of my baby filled the room, I felt a strength rise within me, a strength I didn't know I had. I was a mother now, and nothing would ever come between me and my child. As I held my newborn baby in my arms, feeling the tiny heartbeat against my chest, I reflected on the journey that had led me to this solitary but profound moment. The early days of my marriage to Mark, filled with love and shared dreams, now seemed like a distant mirage. After our wedding, I had entered our marriage with a heart full of hope. Mark and I had moved into a cozy apartment, a space we eagerly turned into our little haven. But as the days turned into months, the cracks began to show, widening with each passing moment. Mark's mother, Evelyn, became an ever-present shadow in our lives. Her calls were frequent, her demands increasingly unreasonable. Each time the phone rang, my heart sank, knowing it would pull Mark away from me, from us. I remember one evening, Mark and I had planned a quiet dinner at home. It was rare for us to have time alone, and I had spent the afternoon preparing his favorite dish. But just as we were about to sit down, his phone rang. It was Evelyn, and she needed him. Her car had broken down, and she insisted Mark come to help her, despite my suggestion to call a roadside assistance service. "Anna, she's my mother. I can't leave her stranded," Mark had said, his voice tinged with frustration. "But what about us, Mark? What about our plans?" I had asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He didn't answer, just grabbed his coat and left, leaving me alone with the dinner I had so lovingly prepared. That night, I ate alone, the silence of the apartment a stark reminder of my growing loneliness. As my pregnancy progressed, I hoped it would bring Mark closer, that the prospect of our own family would shift his priorities. But the opposite happened. Evelyn's calls became more frequent, her reasons for needing Mark more absurd. And Mark, trapped in a cycle of guilt and obligation, never said no. I tried to talk to him, to make him see how his actions were affecting our marriage, but my words fell on deaf ears. "She's alone, Anna. She has no one else," he would say, his eyes pleading for understanding. But what about me? Wasn't I his family too? These were questions I asked myself every night as I lay in bed, Mark often absent, attending to his mother's latest crisis. And then, the day my water broke, the day that should have been the happiest of our lives, Mark chose Evelyn over me, over our baby. It was a betrayal that cut deeper than any of her harsh words or his broken promises. In the hospital, Cradling my baby, I made a decision. I would no longer be a bystander in my own life, watching as others dictated my happiness. I would stand up for myself, for my child. Mark had made his choice, and now it was time for me to make mine. As I gazed into the innocent eyes of my baby, I felt a resolve harden within me. I would leave Mark and his toxic bond with his mother. I would start afresh, build a life for me and my child, a life free of shadows and manipulation. My baby's soft cooing brought me back to the present, a gentle reminder of the new path that lay ahead. A path filled with challenges, no doubt, but also with the promise of freedom and a new beginning. As the first light of dawn broke through the hospital window, casting a warm glow over us, I knew that this was the start of something new. A journey of resilience and self-discovery, a journey where I would no longer be just Anna, but a mother, strong and undeterred. The day I was abandoned by my husband on the way to the hospital, my world shifted irreversibly. Lying in the hospital bed, cradling my newborn, I couldn't help but replay that day over and over in my mind. It started like any other day, except for the undercurrent of excitement and anticipation. The baby was due any day now, and every moment felt charged with the promise of new life. But when my water broke, that excitement turned to fear and urgency. Mark's reaction was a mix of panic and concern, but it was quickly overshadowed by his mother's timely interruption, the phone call that changed everything. Evelyn needed him, and despite the critical nature of our situation, Mark chose to respond to her call. I remember feeling a mix of disbelief and despair as he explained, his voice strained, "Anna, I promised to help Mom. She's waiting for me." "But Mark, I'm in labor. We need to go to the hospital now." My voice was a mixture of pain and pleading. He hesitated, torn, but then his resolve faltered. "I'm sorry, Anna. I'll be back as soon as I can. Here, take this for a taxi." He pressed a $20 bill into my hand, a paltry sum that felt like an insult in the enormity of the moment. As he drove away, leaving me alone and vulnerable on the verge of childbirth, I realized the bitter truth. My husband, the man I had loved and trusted, had chosen his mother over his wife and unborn child. The taxi ride to the hospital was a blur of pain and tears. I was alone, save for the sympathetic driver who tried his best to comfort me. His kindness was a small solace in the overwhelming sense of betrayal and abandonment I felt. In the hospital, as I labored to bring our child into the world, the absence of my husband was a gaping wound. The pain of childbirth was nothing compared to the heartache of his betrayal. But in that moment of intense vulnerability, I found an inner strength I didn't know I possessed. I was doing this alone, but I was doing it. With every contraction, every push, I was not only bringing new life into the world, but also birthing a new version of myself. When my baby finally arrived, the sound of his first cry was the sweetest music I had ever heard. As I held him in my arms, I knew that our journey together would be filled with challenges, but also with immeasurable love and joy. Mark's absence in those crucial hours spoke louder than any words he had ever said. It was a clear message that his loyalties lay elsewhere, not with the family we had created together. As I gazed down at my baby, a sense of determination settled over me. I would not let Mark's choices define us. We would move forward, just the two of us, and create a life filled with the love and stability that my child deserved. That day, I not only became a mother, but also made a vow to myself and my baby. We would no longer be secondary in someone else's life. We would be our own priority, our own family, and nothing would ever come between that. The first rays of morning light streamed through the hospital window, casting a gentle glow on the tiny face of my son. As I watched him sleep peacefully in my arms, a sense of clarity washed over me. I had crossed a threshold, stepping into a world where I was no longer just Anna, but a mother determined to forge a path filled with love and security for my child. The events of the previous day, with Mark's unfathomable decision to abandon me in my hour of need, still stung with fresh pain. Yet, as I looked at my son, I knew that this pain was not just an end but a beginning too. A beginning of a life where I was the sole architect of my destiny. I remembered waking up, still groggy from the exhaustion of childbirth, to find the room empty. There was no sign of Mark. The realization that he had not been there to witness the birth of our child, to share in the joy and awe of this miracle, was a sobering reminder of the reality I faced. As the morning progressed, my resolve strengthened. I knew I had to make decisions, not just for myself, but for the tiny life that depended on me. The first was to move out of the home I shared with Mark and to seek the comfort and support of my own family. When Mark finally arrived, late in the afternoon, his face etched with concern and guilt, it was too late. The sight of him, once a source of comfort, now only brought a sense of betrayal. "Anna, I'm so sorry. I should have been here," he began, his voice trembling. But I cut him off, my own voice steady despite the turmoil inside. "Mark, you made your choice, and now I've made mine. I can't trust you to be there for us, not when it truly matters." The hurt in his eyes was evident, but the time for apologies and excuses had passed. As he looked at our son, a flicker of longing crossed his face, but I knew that longing was not enough. Can I hold him?" Mark asked hesitantly. I hesitated, torn between the desire to let him bond with his son and the need to protect my child from future hurt. But in the end, I handed our son to him, watching as Mark held him with a tenderness that contrasted sharply with his earlier abandonment. After a few moments, I took my son back, my decision firm. "Mark, I'll be going to my parents' house. We need space and time to figure things out." Mark nodded, the realization of the gravity of the situation dawning on him. "I understand. I'll give you whatever space you need." As I made arrangements for my discharge and subsequent move, I felt a sense of empowerment. I was taking control of my life, making choices that were right for me and my son. The journey ahead would be challenging, but I was ready to face it head-on. Leaving the hospital that day, with my son cradled in my arms, I stepped into the crisp air, a sense of freedom enveloping me. The road ahead was uncertain, but one thing was clear: I was not alone. I had my son, and together we would navigate this new world, a world where we were each other's priority. The days following my discharge from the hospital were a blend of overwhelming love for my son and the stark reality of my new life. Moving in with my parents brought a much-needed sense of security and support. As I navigated the uncharted waters of motherhood, their presence was a comforting constant in the turbulence of my emotional upheaval. Mark's absence in our lives was palpable, but with each passing day, I grew more resolute in my decision. The breach of trust and his subsequent failure to prioritize our family were wounds too deep to simply heal with time and apologies. However, the finality of our separation brought its own set of challenges. I initiated divorce proceedings, a decision that was as painful as it was necessary. Mark was stunned, his initial disbelief giving way to a reluctant acceptance. The man who had once vowed to stand by me in sickness and in health now stood at a distance, a silent spectator to the dissolution of our marriage. The legal process was tedious, but amid the paperwork and meetings, I found a strength I didn't know I had. I was not just fighting for myself, but for my son, too. The settlement included a claim for damages, a recognition of the emotional and physical toll Mark's actions had taken on me, particularly during the vulnerable period of my pregnancy. As I juggled the demands of legal battles and new motherhood, word of our separation began to spread. Mark's mother, Evelyn, tried to reach out to me, but I firmly kept my distance. The toxic bond she shared with Mark had been a major catalyst in our downfall, and I was determined to shield myself and my son from further manipulation. In the midst of this, karma seemed to find its way to Mark. His reputation, once that of a loving husband and doting father, was now tarnished. His colleagues and friends who had once admired his commitment to his family now viewed him with a mix of pity and disdain. The man who had prided himself on his familial values had fallen from grace, and the community's judgment was swift and unforgiving. As for me, I found solace in the little moments with my son. His first smile, the way his tiny fingers wrapped around mine, the soft coos as he drifted to sleep. These were the joys that filled my days and gave me the strength to keep moving forward. Slowly but surely, I began to rebuild my life. My parents, ever supportive, were my pillars of strength, and my son was my beacon of hope. The journey was not easy, but it was filled with small victories and immense growth. Looking back, I realized how far I had come, from a wife overshadowed by the influence of a controlling mother-in-law to a single mother standing on her own 2 feet. The transformation was nothing short of remarkable. And as I lay my son down to sleep each night, I whispered promises of a better future. A future where we were not defined by the past, but shaped by the love and resilience that had brought us this far. Years have passed since the day I made the decision to walk away from a marriage that had become a shadow of what it once promised. As I sit in the quiet of my parents' garden watching my son play, his laughter a balm to my soul, I reflect on the journey that brought us here. The path was not easy. There were moments of doubt, nights filled with tears, and days when the weight of single motherhood felt overwhelming. But each challenge also brought with it a lesson in strength, a testament to the resilience of the human spirit. Mark, once a central figure in my life, now seemed like a distant memory. His attempts to reconcile, initially frequent and desperate, had slowly dwindled over time. The last I heard, he had moved to another city, a consequence of the life he had chosen. His mother, Evelyn, remained a part of his life, but their bond, once the cause of so much pain in mine, was no longer my concern. My son, now a vibrant and curious little boy, was the source of my strength. His presence reminded me daily of the decision I made, not just for myself, but for him. A decision to break free from a toxic environment and provide him with a life filled with love, stability, and the freedom to grow. My parents, ever supportive, had been my rock through it all. They had embraced their roles as grandparents with a love and dedication that filled our home with warmth. Their support had been invaluable, giving me the space and strength to find my footing as a single mother. As I watched my son, I couldn't help but feel a sense of pride in the person I had become. The journey had reshaped me, not just as a mother but as an individual. I had found a sense of purpose, a clarity that only comes from facing and overcoming life's trials. Life, I realized, is a tapestry of experiences, each thread woven with moments of joy and sorrow, victories and defeats. My story was no different. It was a story of love lost and found, of betrayal and forgiveness, of falling down and rising up stronger. In this moment of reflection, I knew that the road ahead would have its own set of challenges. But I also knew that I was no longer the woman who once felt helpless in the face of adversity. I was stronger, wiser, and more resilient. As the sun set, casting a warm glow over the garden, I called out to my son. He ran to me, his face alight with the simple joy of childhood. And in his embrace, I found not just the love of a child, but the promise of a future filled with hope and endless possibilities. Life had come full circle, and as I held my son close, I knew that this was just the beginning. A beginning of a new chapter. A chapter where we were the protagonists of our own story. A story of triumph and resilience.